Well, hello, my kindred spirits. How in the world have you been? I am so glad that you came back to see me today. Now, I have something so special to show you, and I think that you're going to really enjoy seeing it, but most of all, you're going to really enjoy hearing some of the sounds of this. Today, we're going to talk all about spinning wool and spinning cotton fibers into yarn. And I've got a spinning wheel here. And let me turn this camera down so you can see my spinning wheel. And I'm going to show you how to work this in just a few minutes. And it has the most wonderful, relaxing sound. But I'm also going to show you, these are my carders. And I talked about these in another video. And I'm going to tell you a little bit how these work as well. I love it. I love it. So let me tell you a little bit about how I even got started in learning how to spin wool. And wool, as most of you know, comes from sheep. And so when we first started homeschooling our children many, many years ago, I got involved with the Charlotte Mason method of homeschooling and the Waldorf method of homeschooling. So that's a very nature and book based methods of homeschooling and very hands-on. And so you're not so much sitting and learning from instruction from a teacher. You are out in nature learning with your hands out there in the dirt and getting down and dirty with all things that you're learning. And so you're immersing yourself in that learning process. And so my children thrived in that, and I did too, really. So we learned about wool and sheep at the time, and so we bought 2 sheep to put out on our homestead, and my children took care of those sheep. Idgy and Nudge were their names, and they were a Corriedale and a Corriedale Dorset mixed. They were wonderful, sweet little sheep. One was white, and then one was sort of a brownish color. So every year we had to have them sheared in the spring, and so we had some people who came down from Raleigh. There were a couple of other people who had sheep in the area, and they would come out, and it was only $75. Can you believe that? They would come out and shear our sheep for $75, and I've got pictures. I'll put them in the video here so that you can see it too. It was so fascinating to watch. And so what I would do with that wool, there's a lot of it. You can't believe how much wool can come off of one little sheep. And so you have to process it in order to use it. So processing it can look like several different methods. And of course you can do it yourself, or you can send it off to have it done. I chose to send most of mine off to have it processed because, first of all, I didn't know what I was doing, and second of all, I just didn't have the tools to do it. So one time I sent it off to a mill in Michigan, and then another time I had it sent to a mill in Mars Hill, North Carolina, and they did a fantastic job both times. So the first time I had it sent off, they made it into something called roving. And so what roving looks like is this. So it's these long strands of wool, and I mean, I have so much wool from those sheep, I will never be able to use all of it. So what they've done is sheep's wool is very dirty and very oily when you first get it off the sheep. So what they had to do was they had to clean it, and then they had to soak a lot of the oil, which is also called lanolin. It's very good for your skin, by the way. And they had to get all of that out, and then they put it through a process in which they combed it and got all of the fibers straight, and then they made this roving. And it even still has I can still smell those little sheep all those years later. It's not a bad smell. It's a pleasant little smell. It sort of smells like sheep and soap. So that was from one of my sheep, and then this other roving is from the white sheep that I had. And I've got strands and strands of this, and I'm going to show you in just a few minutes how I use this to make yarn in my spinning wheel. So all that to say, it was such a fun time in life. We also use some of that wool to make what are called bats, wool bats, B-A-T-T-S. And what that is it's batting that you put in between your quilt to make a nice warm quilt. So each of my children, I made them a handmade quilt with wool batting in between it from the sheep that they helped raise, and they still are using those quilts on their beds right now. And it's so fun to see that, you know, something that you took care of, those children took care of, also that if you take care of that animal takes care of you by rewarding you with that warm wool. And you know, wool sometimes can get a bad reputation because it can be itchy when you wear it as clothing. It is itchy as a hat too, but it's so warm. It is so wonderfully warm. And so I did make some notes because I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget anything, but let me show you just a couple of things because I think you're really going to enjoy this. And I should have started off by saying, if this isn't something you're really interested in seeing and you just need to go to sleep, I will keep my voice calm. I'll try not to get too excited and too loud. And then you can just put the phone face down next to your bedside table and you can just drift off to dream as I talk about this. But I do hope that you'll flip the phone over maybe tomorrow or maybe while you're studying and you're just kind of listening to me as background noise, because it is a fascinating world. It is so much fun to learn about this. So let me show you just a couple of things, first of all, that I've made over the years. Mostly I've only made yarn, but I did manage to knit this hat out of one of our little sheep's wool, and I dyed this wool. You have to use a special kind of protein dye when you're dyeing things like wool or animal-based fibers, because it doesn't, certain dyes won't dye animal-based fibers. And so I have to use something called a mordant along with my dye, and I used a pot dyeing method, so I have to heat the water up, put the mordant in, put the color in, and then dip my wool roving down in there and then let it sit for a little while, and then when you bring it out, it's got that beautiful color. You talk about so much fun. It's so dreamy to have all these dye pots in your laundry room as you're dyeing all of that wool. One time we even went out and we picked a bunch of dandelions because we thought that would be neat to try to dye our wool with dandelions. Natural dyes, I have found, aren't as good as synthetic dyes. I'm sure that there are methods in which you can really extract that color from the natural dyes, but I haven't found it yet. But anyway, it was so beautiful to see the different colors that you can get from things like avocado peels, for instance. Avocado peels make a beautiful pink color. You'd never guess that. And it's fascinating, friends. It is absolutely fascinating. So anyway, here is one of the things that I did make, and it's just a good warm little toboggan hat that I like to wear on occasion. It is a little bit itchy, but it's so fun because it's something that I made from start to finish. I mean, you know, we got that little sheep sheared, and then we got the wool cleaned, and then I managed to dye the wool. I spun it into yarn, and then I knitted it into this hat. And so I'm very proud of this. But I'm going to put that aside because I have so many things here to show you. This is one of the first yarns that I ever created, and I am not a good spinner. I don't have a lot of experience, but it's just fun. It sort of looks like I mean, isn't that beautiful? Now, this is all natural colored. I haven't dyed this at all. And they call this artisan yarn because it's not perfect throughout. It has a lot of nibs and a lot of funny looking places because it's not perfect, but it does make up a beautiful yarn. And then you can use it, to make clothing or sweaters or hats, or you can even use it in textile art as well. So I've got that on here, and then I'll also show you too, I have several different, I don't know if you pronounce this skein or skeins of yarn here that I've twisted up and made. Now these are crazy colors together. I was just experimenting, but it's kind of a turquoise and a yellow yarn. And then I always loved this kind of orange rust color. I always thought that was really pretty. And again, I can still smell that lanolin. You'll never get all the lanolin out of wool. It's very difficult. If I were to lay this, some of the, I can feel the stickiness. I was going to say if I laid this on a piece of white paper, you'd probably see the lanolin leach out of it because it is so full of that sheep's lanolin. I always thought that this one was very pretty. Isn't that neat looking? And so this just has a double twist in this yarn. But I always thought that that was a very pretty yarn as well. And then I have this kind of a purpley and green color. And you know what? This purpley, it's a purpley pink color. This is actually the color that I got when I used the avocado hulls or the avocado skin when I dyed this one. So you can see that kind of purpley pinkish color. And I just think that that's fascinating to see those colors. And I need to knit this up into something, but I just haven't. I just like to look at the balls of yarn that I created there. And then here's another one. This is, again, just some early little twists. And this one actually hasn't even been twisted into yarn. It's just a single ply. It doesn't have more than one ply on it. So let me put that over there. And then I'm going to show you some more pieces that I have here. I always thought that this one was pretty. And again, this is just experimentation. When I first got my spinning wheel, I would sit and play with it for hours and hours trying to get it right, because it's almost hypnotic when you're playing with the spinning wheel, because the sound and the wheel spinning, it's just very comforting and soothing to sit and learn how to spin. So there's that piece, and then one last, this is a very colorful ball of yarn. It's kind of mishmashed, but I always loved how that one looked as well. So then I have some pieces here that I dyed with some more synthetic colorant. It's a powder that you use, and you put your wool down in the pots again, and you can have these just beautiful colors. I remembered loving this one because of the name. It's called Nutmeg, and I loved that color. But a lot of them are more muted colors. Of course, if you were dyeing this with the bright dyes, it would be a brighter color. But these are, I used this darker wool here, and so that's why I have that more muted color in here. But if any of you have ever seen the little needle felted animals or people that people have made, some people like to make little things like fruits and vegetables, little pumpkins and things like that out of felt. This is what you can use to make your little needle felted items. It is such a fun hobby to have. And now what you do let me show you this real quick. These cards, let's see if I can show you. They have little, it's almost like two brushes, and they have little teeth on them. They look like a tiny little needle almost, and they're short. And what you use these for is, before there were places that you could send your wool off to if you had to process your own wool, you had to have something like these cards to, first of all, get the fiber straight in order to put them in the spinning wheel and spin your wool into a yarn. And this also helped to clean it out too, because a lot of times there's sticks and brambles in here too when you first shear your sheep. So what you do is, we're going to pretend like this is a raw piece of wool, because you wouldn't always use the roving for this. And again, the roving are the pieces that have already been processed and are ready to spin. But you would take your pieces of wool just like that. Then you take your other card sound. And what you're doing is you're working to get the fibers all straight, because what you're going to do next is you're going to transfer everything over. And I have forgotten how to do this, so if you're an expert, forgive me in not remembering. Let's see if I can get it transferred. Well, we'll just leave that there. Then you take your pieces, now they're nice and combed out, and you pick them up gently off of the comb, and then you roll it up just like this. And then you set that aside, and you keep doing that until you have a bunch of these. These are called roll-logs. And once you have a whole lot of these, then you're ready to come to the spinning wheel and spin these into yarn. So let me show you what that looks like next. Okay, so this is my spinning wheel, and this actually came from Australia. A friend of mine had it for a long time in a warehouse, and someone had given it to her, and she used it for a while, and then she decided that she didn't want it anymore, so she gave it to me, and she sent it to me from Texas. And so I love this one. I have since bought a newer one that has a little bit of a different way of spinning. It's a 2-foot paddle. This is just a 1-foot, but this is my favorite still. I love this one because I guess it's the one I learned on, so it's my old favorite. So what I do is, it's foot powered, and I'll show you in a second how it works, but when you sit, you pump this little, see how that's going up and down, and you use that little foot pump to make the wheel spin, and then you're sitting here feeding your wool into this little hole, and it's spinning it and it's making yarn. I'll move the camera around and I'll show you so you can see it better close up. Okay, so you can see right here I've already got some yarn started, and then I'm going to turn this around just a little bit so I can see what I'm doing, and then you can hear the sounds. So I have my little roll log here of that fiber that I carded. And so I'm going to pull this out just a little bit so I can get it all started. And I just want you to listen to this sound because, again, it is so, so beautiful. And what I'm doing is I'm pulling and then letting that wool feed in, pulling it back. And I'm just using short, it's called short draw, because I'm just making little short pulls or draws. And whoops, I let it go. But after you have spun everything, then you can have your 2 bobbins, 2 or 3 bobbins filled up with your spun pieces of wool, and you can then take these 2 pieces and spin them back on another bobbin here, and you can create your yarn from spinning your 2 or 3 pieces of wool. Now, another thing that I want to show y'all, and I have the funniest story to tell about this. A few videos back, I told you that there are cotton fields all over around where we live, and I asked you if you'd like to see some cotton and maybe see it spun into little pieces of yarn. I don't think I'm going to do that because I'll tell you why. First of all, let me show you. Let me show this to you first, and then I'll tell you the funny story. So you see that it's filthy. It's full of little leaves. It's just the cotton leaves from the fields. This was harvested by a big cotton harvester, a big combine machine. And so one morning we were leaving the house. It was early, me, my daughter, and my husband, and we were driving along the road, and I had just seen a big combine coming out of a cotton field and knew that they had just harvested it. Well, as we drove along, I saw it looked like a big white fluff of snow in the middle of the road on a sunny day. The combine had dumped accidentally a bunch of cotton from the edges. Usually it shoots into a, it's almost like it rolls, those big old bales of cotton that you see in the fields. I'll show you a picture. But some of it got lost, and it just accidentally spilled on the road. And they just leave it there. It gets blown off to the side. And the birds pick it up, and little mice and things to go build their little houses. So it's a natural material. So anyway, I saw these drifts of fresh cotton in the middle of the road, and I told my husband, stop, I've got to get it, I got to get it. And so my daughter, she laughed. I didn't realize she had taken the picture until afterwards, but it was a moment of just bliss, because I had asked a friend of mine if I could go harvest some of the cotton in his field, and he said, go ahead. But this was much better because I didn't have to go pick it myself. I just picked it out of the road. But anyway, it was so much fun, and I'm glad that I got it. But let me tell you, this is a lot harder even than the wool, because do you see, I'm trying to take it off right now. There's a seed. There's a seed. It is full of little seed pods and these leaves. It is really dirty. And I don't even know. We'll try to get this on here and see if we can make it work. Have you ever heard little blonde-headed children called towheads? T-O-W, towheads. Well, that's where this is where that term comes from, because these little light-colored fibers, either from cotton or flax, is called tow. And so if you have a little child or somebody you know that's got short little blonde hair, and you hear them called towheads, this is where that term came from. So you can see, okay, so I'm going to peel that off, and then you can see those little seeds there. I mean, this is pretty messy. Cotton is a beautiful plant when it's growing out in the field. And my grandmother, when she was a little girl, her parents were sharecroppers. And so my great-granddaddy would rent. Sometimes he would rent from farmers who had a larger farm, and then they would grow a crop out there and work for the man who owned the big farm, and then they would live, my grandmother's family would live there on the farm in another house somewhere, and then share the workload of the farm. And so there were 8 of them, 8 children, and so they all got out there and picked that cotton. And as a matter of fact, it's so interesting because so many people that I know used to grow it, and way before the technology came into being, to harvest it with a machine, you had to harvest it yourself, and it's back-breaking work, and it's bloody work because you cut your hands. So I'm so glad for modern machines and modern inventions to help harvest this. So I'm pulling this off, and yeah, as you can see how short the cotton fibers are. I probably could feed it into here, but it would be so difficult to try to make the speed of this wheel go slow enough and then feed this in slow enough to where it twists without breaking, that it would, I just don't even think I want to do it. It would just be too labor intensive. So I'm probably not going to try to spin the cotton into yarn because it's just too much. That's why it's easier for me anyway to take something like this roving, which the fibers are already long anyway, and when you go to spin it, you've already got these long fibers that you can feed into the wheel, and it's a lot easier to pull out, draw it out, let it spin in, and draw it out some more. So it's a lot easier to do it like that. But it is such, again, it's such a fun hobby to have. And we no longer have the sheep. One of them died, and then we gave the other one away because they are very much companion animals, and they like to have another little sheep or at least another buddy in the field with them. And then so we just wound up giving our second one away. But it was, for that season of life, it was so much fun taking care of them and learning about them. And my kids had to go out there and learn how to make sure that their hooves were clean and cut properly so that they wouldn't get the rot inside of their hooves. I know that's kind of gross to think about, but that's something that you do have to think about if you have animals. But it was really interesting and a lot of fun, and it makes you appreciate so much more where things come from and appreciate the work that our ancestors had to do before all this modern technology was invented. Because think about how difficult that would be if you were trying to raise a family and think about that, if you had to grow your own cotton or your own, raised sheep to make your own clothing. I mean, that's not just spinning wheels, but then a lot of ladies also, along with a spinning wheel, had the big looms in the house where they they wove the wool into cloth to make clothing or blankets and things. And so can you just imagine how hard that must have been? No wonder people didn't live very long, because it's a hard way to live. But it's so interesting. And it again, it makes you feel a little closer to your ancestors when you do things like this, and you realize that this isn't just a fun hobby to do. This is something that people really had to do to survive a long time ago. And aren't we lucky that we don't have to do this anymore? We can just now do it for fun instead. Well, I hope that that was interesting to you, my friends. If you have any questions at all, ask them in the comments section, because I love to teach people about this. I don't know a whole lot, but I'll tell you as much as I possibly can. And I will tell you one other thing too. There are still people who will teach you how to work your spinning wheels. There was a lady in Asheville that I took my wheel up to. She was at the Asheville Farmers Market, as a matter of fact, and her name was Melissa. And she taught me how to use my spinning wheel, because you can watch videos on how to do it, and that's fine, but there's something about having a real human there with you, watching you and watching your hand movements, so that they can tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And it's just nice to have some supervision of a human being by your side. But again, if you have any questions, ask them in the comments section, because I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I want to help you in any way I can. So that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really sincerely appreciate y'all watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you're still awake, and I will see you on the next one. Y'all take care.